A very happy evening to all who are participating today. It could be an afternoon or it could be a morning, depending on which side of the world that you are in, because today entrepreneurship is truly global. Before I move further, I will just take a minute to share my screen. Okay, so here we go. In the next few minutes, I will take you through what we are trying to do at this new center for Center for Research for Startups and risk financing. So naturally, our focus is as a part of the center is the startup, and more specifically the startup ecosystem in India. And we are going to start with the startup ecosystem in India. The picture that you see here is the newly constructed IIT Madras Research Park, which is now today emerged as one of the most prominent ecosystems in India for innovation and entrepreneurship. Specifically, if we look at how the industrial and business policy evolution has kind of evolved over a period of time in India. When India got independence in the late 40s and early 50s, the primary driver of the government was use the public sector as a major role to achieve what is called as the commanding heights of the economy. Right, the initial the thrust by the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was to really use public sector to push India to the heights of the economy. And then subsequently moving forward, there's a big thrust in the 80s. In the late 80s, there was a big thrust on the small and medium enterprise, the SMEs. The SMEs were supposed to be a leading group to employment generation and also doing a lot of manufacturing. And then moving to the 90s, we really had a major change in terms of the government thinking, which is in terms of bringing in liberalization and the economic reforms. That fundamentally changed the way India has been operating since the time of independence. And fast forward today, one of the major policy agenda for the government is actually to promote startups, right? In fact, in 2016, we knew that the Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi, stood on the ramparts of the Red Fort on his Independence Day address and said, "Startup India, stand up India." So our center essentially focus on the current policy imperative, which is the focus on startups. So if you look at India today, India has become the fourth largest startup ecosystem in the world. So that's a significant achievement. It's much better than several of the advanced and the OECD countries. And India has been phenomenally, traditionally a very entrepreneurial country, but then the entrepreneurship has largely been restricted to the small and medium enterprise. But if you today look at it, there has been a significant focus on startups. So when I say startups, what differentiates startups from the traditional SME is the stress on innovation and technology. So that is what separates a startup from an SME, though in terms of size, though in terms of various other operating parameters, so there may not be much differentiate between SMEs and the startup. So the picture that you see here indicates the number of new businesses that have been registered in India. And so what we find is a strong growth starting from 2006. Right, when we are talking about a number of close to 50,000 enterprises being registered per year. In 2020, we are close to about 150,000 enterprises registering per year. So that's almost a threefold increase in a span of 15 years. So that's the kind of growth that has been seen in the Indian startup ecosystem. And if you look at the startup ecosystem, we also need to look at the organizations that nurture, these startups, right? So one of the major organizations that is nurturing the startups is my screen visible?
No. No, it is not.
Okay, so I'm just resharing. Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Now it is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So we have incubators, which is one of the major organizations in the startup ecosystem, and so that is also an indicator of how the ecosystem has evolved. So today we see the network of incubators has significantly grown, right? So these incubators could be either based on the industry or it could be based on academic institutions like IIT Madras. So this is an indicator of how the startup ecosystem has evolved in recent years in India. And naturally, a startup cannot survive without funding, because many of the startups need a lot of investment initially before they can start generating the cash flows that can support their investment requirements. So naturally, we need to have supporting institutions that can direct this investment. So we need to have angel investors, we need to have venture capital companies. More the number of investors indicates that more number of startups can to get supported. Again, if you see this graph, in the last 10 years, there has been, what started off as a gradual growth. There has been substantial growth in the total quantum of investments that has actually flowed in India in the startups. So this is another graph that looks at how the funding has increased starting from 2016 and before and post 2016, right? So we are seeing a secular kind of investment flow across different sectors, starting from enterprise applications to logistics and travel and hospitality tech. Different sectors we have seen action in terms of startups. And the average post 2016, which is the red dotted line, is much higher than the black dashed line, which is 2016 and earlier. And naturally, it is also in several ways impacting the economy. If you look at investment as a percentage of GDP, that has consistently increased. In fact, today, the venture investments as a percentage of GDP is significantly higher in India as compared to the global or the USA numbers, right? So this has been again a very, very big game changer on the Indian context. So the phases of the startup ecosystem. So naturally, if you look at startups, I said there's technology and innovation, right? So most of the time, startups are essentially having a very strong base in the technology space. So if you look at the technology startup ecosystem, we could kind of broadly identify 4 different phases, right? 1991 to 2006 is the first wave of the startup ecosystem that was set up in India, starting with the liberalization and also to a certain extent taking advantage of the dot-com, of the Y2K and the dot-com boom that resulted in that time. Then we have the introduction phase starting from 2006 to 2010. So after the bust of the dot-com, then gradually things started picking up pace to the later part of the first decade of the millennium, and then we see some solid growth. And then we had early growth from 2011 to 2015, and today we are seeing what is called as an accelerated growth phase, 2015 to 2020. So the center being set up today is clearly at the epicenter of this accelerated growth phase that we are seeing in India. Quickly, the vision of what we plan to do as a part of the center. So we need to really have a triple helix interaction, which really brings together the government, the industry, and the university. Right? So any particular segment of the economy where these 3 things come together, then there is a lot more sustainability, there is a lot more growth, there is a lot more contributions to the economy as a whole. Right? So today, if you really look at it, one of the big objectives of the center is to really bring and catalyze the triple helix interaction. So we're already having a very strong policy focus from the government. I've just briefly mentioned about the growth that is actually happening in the industry. So what is needed here is the contribution from the universities in terms of research that can augment whatever is actually happening from the policy and the practice. Right? So this is the big goal that we have. They introduce the research that can strengthen the triple helix interactions. The vision of the center is to be globally recognized as the leading center of research engaged in these following activities. 1, naturally being set up as the part of academic institute. Scholarly research is an important component in the areas of creation, development, and financing of innovation and startups. The second major aspect is creation of a unique world-class data repository and startups. A significant challenge for most startups is access to data, and we wanted to see if we could really mitigate that hurdle in terms of creating a data repository ourselves and making it accessible for researchers and others who would want to take advantage of that. And 3, develop unique data sets, right, which has not been used before. Several using data that has previously not been used, and try and use these unique data sets that are very specific to the Indian context, and increases chance of breakthrough findings. And finally, also synthesize the evidence on various policies and programs that have been implemented, and see if we could inform policymakers and practitioners for better and effective interventions. These are some of the activities to continue what I have said as a part of the vision: to do scholarly research, to commission projects, studies for government and industry bodies on the startup ecosystem. And then we're talking about dissemination and engagement, organizing various conferences and workshops, publications, partnership with government and other agencies. To a certain extent, where we can promote internationalization and collaboration, training and education will also be a part of it, organizing seminars and lectures, and so on. The impact, this will be the following impact in terms of a scholarly research. Naturally, our first target is to publish in top ranked journals, so we want to see a global impact. In terms of our ability to influence practice, we believe, given the fact that most of the data is going to be on the regional economies and the regional incubators and so on, we expect to make an influence in regional level at the practice. And policy is going to be largely, the impact is going to be national, because we'll work with various governments to inform policy making and synthesize evidence. Quickly to look at some of the current work that we are doing, the current research and projects. So we started with focusing, doing a research on how do venture investors manage risk, right? Venture investors manage risk using a variety of strategies. Some of them do staging, which is essentially look at making investments in multiple tranches. And then we have syndication, where investors join together to make investments. And some of them also do investment structuring, right? They kind of invest in structured instruments that can create incentives for the entrepreneurs to perform well. And they also do portfolio diversification. So this is one major research area that we are focusing on: what kind of risk management strategies are effective by venture investors. The second focus area is to really look at the role of incubators and accelerators in new venture creation. How have incubators and accelerators contributing for the growth of the startup economy in India? So that's the second aspect. I'm going to invite my colleague, Professor Krishna, to talk about the remaining focus areas that we are starting to work on. Professor Krishna, you would like to?
Yeah, sure. Can you put the next slide?
So I've consolidated these two slides here.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So what are the research areas that we are going to work currently, and which is beneficial both for the startup firms themselves as well as the investors who are providing capital in different forms to these startup firms? Why do we call the capital subscribed by the different investors? Precisely, venture capitalists and angel investors are predominantly the providers of capital for startup companies. So they look at the risk. Why do we call that as a risk capital? Because the capital that they provide is will not be having an expected returns in the early times, and the kind of a risk that they are taking is very different compared to any other type of investments. For example, if you look at the venture capital investments, the illiquidity is one major issue. The minute the venture capitalist identified that the firm is not going at an expected pace, he cannot withdraw his investment or exit the firm. He has to ensure that the firm reaches a reasonable level for him to liquidate his investment. The more important thing is, how do we predict the probability of failure and probability of success for the new technology-oriented startup firms? Then how do we value a firm? Every investor wants to understand, if he is putting the money, what will be the value he will realize when he exits from the investment. So precisely, valuation models, they estimate three important parameters which are very useful for startup firms as well as investors. What are the three parameters? One is an expected return. What do they get if they invest now? Second one, in terms of risk, what are we saying is, what is the probability of fluctuation in this expected return? I expect 40%. Will I get 40%? If I don't get, will it be 30% at least? Will it be 45%? So the fluctuation, the deviation from an expected return, we call it as a risk parameter. The third and more important parameters for the entire industry landscape is expected growth rate. What is the growth rate that I'm expecting that the firm will achieve in 1 year from now, in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now? So these are the three essential parameters which any valuation model would like to, explain or estimate. So the center will be working on providing uh, these estimated parameters for different industry verticals and risk premium of startups. What do we see is many of the existing successful companies. Last week we had a discussion with the industry captains. When they have innovative ideas, they are deliberating whether they want to experiment with this innovation as an internal R&D, or whether they want to experiment with this innovation as with the help of a newly born startup firm. Because if the innovation is successful, then it will be fine for everybody. But if innovation doesn't go in the way that they expect, then it should not have a shadow effect on the main parent company. So they are looking at whether they can work their innovation or introduce their innovation through startup firms, and here they want to see cost benefit analysis and want to analyze whether it is beneficial to go for startups or whether to begin it as an internal R&D project. So these are the areas which are very useful for cross-section of stakeholders. What do I mean? By both for industry associations, for startup firms themselves, they want to see the success stories before they venture into a new firm, and as well as investors when they are looking at investing in a startup firms. Apart from venture capital investments, and angel investments is a very alternative route. Some of my beloved students from technology departments would choose to do their interns with startup firms. And when I question them, why are you looking at this firm? They immediately say, ma'am, Ratan Tata has invested in this firm. I just expect that the firm will be really flying high in a very short time. So I want to intern and be part of their technology innovations so that I get a very good exposure to what I'm learning right now. So this is the expectation that when angel investors are associated with any startup firm, uh, the everyone associated with the startup firm expect that the firm will rise in no time. So what is it? How can a startup firm attract an angel investment? What is it that the angel investors expect? What conditions will they think that will allow them to invest in the firms? And what is the rejection criteria? Every angel investor or an angel investing company must be receiving large number of applications for seed finance as well as other stages of financing. How do they reject? When will they reject? What is the rejection criteria? If this is well researched and information is available, every startup firm will make their pitch books very much ready so that they can attract angel investments in a big way. So these are the innovative research. We are open to work with any single company who is looking at a specific research problem, or a group of companies or industry associations. We are very open to work with any stakeholder who is looking at a research outcome in this area. This is all about research from CRIST Center.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. So I'm just quickly showcasing this data platform that we have developed, where people can access to, top-notch data pertaining to startup ecosystem in the Indian context. So this is already available. This is live, so people can start accessing it if they need. And finally, the most important part, as far as the participants are concerned, how can they get involved? Right? What are the opportunities and partnerships? With that, I'm going to stop here. So quickly, the center, could actually have a lot of opportunities for internships for students at all levels, at the undergraduate level, at the postgraduate level, as we work through developing the ecosystem. So this is one. Second is we want to work with industry practitioners. Industry practitioners bring a lot of experience to the table, and working with an academic member helps them to take a step back and look at a big picture. So the work with industry practitioners could be in the form of collaborative short research that can result in some short publications, short and high impact publications in the form of op-eds or in practitioner journals. And the industry practitioners also can get access to the data platform, which they might use for their day-to-day decision making. And we also want to collaborate with the researchers across the world, doing joint research projects on areas of mutual interest that also align well with the objectives of the center. The center also has opportunities for exchange visits for faculty members, from different institutes, across the world and at different campuses. People could spend some time here, and people from CREST can actually spend time abroad. So exchange visits. And then, as I was just mentioning earlier, access to the data platform for research purposes, right? For developing publications is another important area where we could collaborate. And we'd also like to work with institutions. Universities, they have a big thrust towards entrepreneurship in their campuses. And the platform that we have developed can complement the classroom teaching with real world data. Right? So the various opportunities and partnerships and collaborations is possible with the center, and we would kind of, would love everybody to get in touch with. To know more about the center, you could visit the website that I have mentioned at the top, and that has a lot more information rather than, as compared to what we have just presented. So I have come to the end of my presentation. Now I would like to request Professor Suresh, the moderator, to take over the rest of the session and engage with the other participants who are attending.